Vice President Mike Pence is again playing the role of President Trump's chief defender and translator, even trying to make sense of what often seems nonsensical.
The president is saying, play politics, protect members of Congress, even if they have committed acts of corruption before the election.
No, I don't think that's what the president was saying at all, Chris. I think the president was referring to the long-standing tradition in the Justice Department to avoid unnecessarily impacting election outcomes. I think President Donald Trump is the most accomplished president of my lifetime, and I think already one of the most successful presidents in American history.
Well, yesterday, amid the fallout from the unnamed opinion piece in the New York Times, Vice President Pence pledged fidelity to the president and vowed to prove he's not the author of that article. Let's take a listen to that.
Do you think you know who Anonymous is?
I don't know. But I do know that they should resign and leave this administration.
Should all top officials take a lie detector test, and would you agree to take one?
I would agree to take it in a heartbeat, and would submit to any review the administration wanted to do.
Well, back in May, columnist George F. Will wrote, "The elegious Mike Pence, with his oleaginous, thanks for the help, with his talent for toadyism and appetite for obsequiousness, could become America's most repulsive public figure." He added that the vice president has become the authentic voice of today's lick-spittle Republican Party. I can't outdo you, George F. Will. Thank you for joining us. I get the feeling when I watch this guy that he is very much in the model that Robert Caro placed Lyndon Johnson. His only way to the presidency was through the vice presidency, and he will do what it takes.
Lyndon Johnson did not realize, however, that the Kennedy people were going to treat him so badly. I think that was an unpleasant experience. Mr. Trump got his man, and his man knew what he was signing up for. In the history of great loves, Romeo and Juliet, Abelard and Eloise, Pence and Trump, the difference is that it's not reciprocated, because there's no love coming back toward Mr. Pence, because Mr. Trump is monogamous. He loves only himself.
How can he win the presidency in any form, in any fashion, in any transition plan, if he's sitting there like a supernumerary in the Da Vinci Code in this sort of pious way, looking at 45 degrees at the back of Trump's neck all the time when you see pictures of him? Is that supposed to impress, not in that picture, is that supposed to impress the Trumpites?
Being vice president is inherently difficult. It's like eating corn on the cob. It's hard to do it with dignity. Yeah. That said, Mondale did, Al Gore did, Cheney did. They all had good relations with their president. But you don't have that kind of relationship with this president.
Someone once said that a man had the soul of a vice president.
Who said that about him?
Well, it was terrible. It was Gene McCarthy talking about Walter Mondale, but that was a Minnesota intramural thought. Anyway, the vice president has frequently played the role of the president's biggest cheerleader, don't you think? Let's watch.
Thanks to the leadership of President Donald Trump, welcome to the beginning of the end of Obamacare. Thank you for your boundless faith in the American people. President Trump has been making history since the first day of this administration.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire cabinet and of millions of Americans when I say congratulations and thank you. You've restored American credibility on the world stage. You signed more bills rolling back federal red tape than any president in American history. You've spurred an optimism in this country that's setting records. I'm deeply humbled as your vice president to be able to be here.
It's the greatest privilege of my life to serve as vice president to President Trump. He's a man of his word. He's a man of action.
I think of the culture of these two gentlemen. One is totally secular in his life. His lifestyle is not pious and religious in any form. The other one seems very pious, very evangelical. I would think moral, and by his terms. What do they got in common, these two guys?
Nothing. Nothing whatever. But if you believe, as Mr. Pence might, and some people say he does believe, that A, he's in constant communication with God, and that God wants him to be president, therefore anything Mr. Pence does that advances his presidential prospects pleases God, if you have that line of reasoning, then you can see why nothing he does is really degrading. It's God's will.
Well, his career has been lickety-split. He went from U.S. Congress to governor of Indiana, the Vice President of the United States is almost Nixonian in its speed. Maybe he has something we don't know. Maybe he knows something we don't know, George. I'm kidding, but he must have reason to believe that he's been selected here.
Well, he might have known that getting on the ticket with Mr. Trump was a way of avoiding a race in Indiana last year in 2016 that he might have lost.
I know that. Well, where are we going with this? What do you think this Vice President is going to do? Is he going to stick around? Obviously, he will for as many terms as he can get, right?
Of course.
Well, there we are. George F. Will, thank you for this absolutely abysmal outlook on the future of Mike Pence.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.